A man without a conscience. Wow. Those are the actual words a U.S. District Court judge used to describe one of the most unbelievable fraudsters in American history. A guy who built this massive financial empire not on some brilliant idea or hard work, but on pure 100% fiction. So the question is, how on earth did this guy become Wall Street's youngest multimillionaire? And get this, he did it all before he was even old enough to legally have a drink. This is the story of a teenage con artist who built a $100 million empire on nothing but lies, and how that entire spectacular illusion came crashing down. You got it, we're talking about ZZZ Best. It's a story that for a little while looked like the ultimate American dream. But what was hiding behind that curtain of incredible success was one of the boldest financial frauds you've ever heard of. Our story starts where so many great business stories do, in a totally normal suburban garage. But this wasn't the birthplace of the next big tech company. Nope. This was the laboratory for a lie. A lie that would be built, piece by piece, one freshly cleaned carpet at a time. The rise of ZZZ Best was, just unbelievably fast. Think about this for a second. In just 4 years, Barry Minkow went from being a high school kid borrowing his mom's station wagon for jobs to being the youngest CEO to ever take a company public. The growth was explosive, almost, literally unbelievable. And as we're about to find out, there was a very, very good reason for that. On the surface, everything looked perfect. You had this super charismatic, impossibly young CEO, you had ZZZ Best vans all over Los Angeles, and you had these glowing articles in the paper. But the engine of this company, it wasn't running on profit. It was running on fumes and a whole lot of fraud. You see, right from the jump, the whole thing was built on shaky ground. Banks, pretty reasonably, weren't about to give loans to a 16-year-old. And the actual carpet cleaning business, it was barely making any money. So what does Minkow do? He turns to petty crime just to stay afloat, stealing money orders, forging credit card slips, and something called check kiting, which is basically a high-wire act of writing bad checks and hoping you can deposit real money before they bounce. These weren't the moves of some business genius. They were the desperate moves of a teenager who was already in way over his head. So here's the million-dollar question, literally. How do you go from small-time check fraud to fooling some of the smartest people on Wall Street? Well, you need a much, much bigger idea. You have to stop faking the small profits and start faking the entire business. And this was Minkow's masterpiece. He just invented a whole new part of the company, insurance restoration. He started telling everyone that ZZZ Best was now handling these huge, multi-million-dollar contracts to repair buildings after fires and floods. The only problem? It was all fake. Every bit of it. This made-up business would eventually account for almost 90% of all the money ZZZ Best claimed to be making. Okay, so here's how he pulled it off. It's kind of a fraud playbook. First, he teamed up with an insurance adjuster to create a fake company that would verify all these imaginary jobs. Then they started printing. They created a whole warehouse filled with forged contracts and phony invoices. So when a banker or an auditor called to check on a job, one of his buddies would answer the phone and say, "Oh yeah, that multi-million-dollar project is going great." It was a classic Ponzi scheme, just using new money from investors to pay off old debts and create the illusion that this was a real thriving company. And this right here shows you just how convincing the whole thing was. What you're looking at is an official document filed with the SEC, the top financial watchdog in the country. It says right there in black and white that ZZZZ Best was a booming company with millions in assets. To the entire outside world, this was totally legit. But it was all a house of cards. The restoration business didn't exist. The assets, just numbers on a page. This one single document filed with the US government represents one of the biggest lies ever told to Wall Street. So, with this fake empire as his foundation, Minkow basically turned himself into a celebrity. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was a phenomenon. He was the kid genius who had somehow cracked the code to success. $100 million. That's what Barry Minkow was worth, on paper anyway, at just 20 years old. He was living the dream, a Ferrari, a mansion in the Hollywood Hills. He was even a guest on Oprah. He was the poster child for 1980s ambition and, excess. This chart just puts the whole scam into perspective, doesn't it? See that tiny little bar on the right? That was the entire real company, the struggling little carpet cleaning business. And that massive bar on the left? That was the fantasy. That was the paper empire that had the entire financial world fooled. But to get that $100 million IPO, Minkow had to level up. He couldn't just trick local bankers anymore. He had to convince the big dogs. He had to pass a super intense audit from Ernst Whinney, one of the most respected accounting firms on the entire planet.
So how did he do it? I mean, this was a masterclass in deception. When the auditor said they needed to see a job site, Minkow's crew found an unfinished building, got the keys for a weekend, and just slapped ZZZ Best signs all over it. They gave the auditors a grand tour of a construction project that had nothing to do with them. He also charmed them, throwing these lavish parties, blurring that professional line. But his most brilliant and devastating move was a legal one.
He made them sign a confidentiality agreement. Now, that sounds pretty standard, right? But he slipped in this hidden clause that legally blocked the auditors from contacting anyone else to verify the contracts. Think about that. They were legally forbidden from making the one phone call to an insurance company, to a building owner, that would have exposed the entire fraud in 5 minutes. They were completely trapped, forced to rely only on the fake documents Minkow handed them. So, with Wall Street, the media, and even the expert auditors totally fooled, it really seemed like nothing could stop Barry Minkow. But his entire $100 million empire was about to be unraveled by the smallest, most insignificant little thread you can imagine. Yeah, you heard that right. It wasn't the SEC, it wasn't the FBI, it wasn't some team of high-powered investigators. The person who brought down a $100 million empire was a homemaker who remembered a small credit card overcharge from years earlier for a simple carpet cleaning job. And here is exactly how it all went down. She read a story in the Los Angeles Times praising Minkow as this business prodigy, and she just called the reporter. She said she couldn't figure out how this supposed millionaire had been so desperate that he had to pull off a petty credit card scam. That one call got the reporter curious. He published a small article about the overcharges, and that just opened the floodgates. More stories of fraud started coming out, investigations began, the stock price totally cratered, and the whole thing just imploded in a matter of weeks. The story very quickly moved from the front page of the business section to the courtroom, and the fall of ZZZ Best was every bit as fast and as dramatic as its rise. The final count was just staggering. Minkow was hit with 54 federal counts: racketeering, securities fraud, money laundering, you name it. He got 25 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay back $26 million. And that, right there, brings us full circle, back to the judge's final chilling assessment of the Wall Street Wonder Boy. But believe it or not, the story doesn't end there. After serving about 7 years, Minkow gets out of prison. He claims he's found God, that he's a changed man, and that he's going to dedicate his life to fighting the very same crimes he once perfected. So on the left, you've got the man he pretended to be, a pastor, a fraud investigator who even consulted for the FBI. But on the right, that's the truth. He was stealing money from his own church. He used his Fraud Discovery Institute to short stocks, which is a Wall Street bet that a company will fail. He'd release fake reports to crash a company's stock and then profit from the collapse. It all finally blew up in his face with a scheme against a home builder called Lenner, which landed him right back in prison, with an insane fine of $584 million. Which really just leaves us with this one final, unsettling question. Was Barry Minkow a guy who genuinely found redemption and then just fell from grace a second time? Or was the story of his redemption simply his most sophisticated, most calculated con of all? It's a question that really gets to the core of a person who could fool almost anyone about almost anything.